I'm technology agnostic, ultimately. What I want is what's best for the building, what's best for people. In some situations, that will be, yes, put in an air source heat pump. There are an awful lot of old buildings which are just not suited to that kind of heat. You need a low temperature distribution system. It's going to cost you twice as much as gas. Most of your buildings probably not on the gas network if they're remote, in which case biomass is genuinely low carbon. Electricity is not going to be low carbon until we completely decarbonize the grid. So, you know, it's horses for courses. Sustainability is a relative thing. In some places, some parts of the world, the key sustainability question is actually the provision of water. So in that sense, I'm certainly technology agnostic. And when I say that there are economies of scale in everything, the same goes for electricity generation. And the concept of a building as an individual energy unit is a false one. So I'm therefore not always wedded to the idea of putting in micro generation. I mean, you can get reverse condensation on buildings. I mean, the cottage I live in, the wettest part of the year is May when the sun hits it. You know, you get weird effects. So capillary open should allow the transport of liquid moisture, but not necessarily water vapor. So that's why I say I think I'd rather defer to the UK Centre for Moisture and Buildings on that one. It's a good question. 50 mil of an insulating lime render, so some heat will still flow through that into the wall, and it is vapor open. You get vapor flowing both directions within walls, from the inside to the out and from the outside to the in. And I think that's, you know, where you can't externally insulate a property, that is actually a very sensible thing to do. The reason, I mean, for those of you, some of you are very techie, some are not. The reason we do external when we can is that the masonry, which is then held within that external shell, becomes what we call thermal mass. So the entire building acts as a storage heater, which is great news. But if you've got a beautiful stone wall, you don't want to insulate it externally. So you have to do what Andrew's just done and use some internal wall insulation. And an insulating lime plaster is a very good way to go. Sustainability is the art of the possible. So you start from where you're at, not from theoretical targets. And if you've got waste, you burn it. Now, that doesn't mean you start importing waste from the other side of the world, but we have got quite a lot of forestry waste and other stuff, which you could leave to decompose and then it produces methane, or you can pelletize it and burn it as, you know, to produce carbon dioxide. But if you burn it at high enough temperatures and in good enough quality boilers, then you haven't got such air quality issues. So it's a relative thing, and you know, every building's different. Some buildings need the kind of hot heat that you're going to get from a boiler, be that biomass, bio-LPG, or some other form of sustainable fuel. That there are various biodiesels, of course, as well. So there are options. But we still want to take a fabric first approach wherever we possibly can. Well, two answers, I suppose. I mean, the people who have been looking into it are Historic England, on the one hand, and SPAB via the Building Performance Project, and Caroline Rye of Archimetrics has been doing monitoring on various different types of retrofitted wall insulation. She hasn't flagged up that particular problem with wood fibre, but I quite agree with you that additives are an issue. And we want stuff which is genuinely sustainable and not building up a problem for the future. So I don't like to see plastics mixed up, for example, with otherwise sustainable products, because any form of composite product is extremely hard to recycle ultimately. So there is a group which is convened by Joe Lugg of the National Trust, which is looking in specifically at this question of minimum energy performance standards and the rental sector. And we have got various people like University of Oxford and big landlords involved. And it would be great if, via Adrian, perhaps you could contact me and I'll put you in touch with that group, and we'd be delighted to have you as a member of it. I mean, IHBC are there. There's all kinds of people you'll already recognise. And you know, I'm sure you could contribute to it as well as learn from it. Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head, really. I mean, at scale, we've introduced PAS 2035. That takes care of the problem, basically, or most of the problem, so far as we can persuade the government at the moment. When you're dealing with retrofitting, you know, 50 or 100 dwellings at a time, if you're looking at an individual building, you're quite right that on top of a kind of 10 grand retrofit budget, you're not going to spend 5 grand on an architect. It doesn't fit the budget. So do start with the STBA's guidance and with Historic England's guidance. As I say, it's all technology agnostic. There's no commercial interest in any of it. But we're also looking at producing some guidance direct for the general public. Firstly, a potted version of PAS 2035, because that's 200 quid. I mean, why produce a new standard designed to drive up the quality of retrofit and then put a 200 quid barrier in front of it? I mean, it's bonkers. And we were involved with the standard. We contributed to it, and you know, it's very good. But if you can't get at it, there's no point having it. But we're also looking at doing a whole series of TV programs. I've handed over the directorship of the STBA to a colleague, and he's actually based in Wales. He's talking to BBC Wales tomorrow. We'd like to do 6 programs initially as a pilot, kind of go to 6 houses and different houses, you know, starting with some traditional ones, but maybe do a 60s house and an 80s house as well, and say, well, what do you do? I mean, how do you go through the decision-making process? Because people don't have access to the kind of expertise that we've all got. And, you know, I'm still learning. You know, I've been at it for years and I'm still learning. So, you know, I think you've raised a really important point. And at the moment, we don't have the answer, but we do need to reach out. And most people you'll go to for advice in terms of builders or product manufacturers have got a vested interest in the outcome of the decision-making process. And that's not the right way to go forward. We need independent advice. And that's what PAS does for large schemes. But I'm afraid it doesn't really work for individual buildings. That the hotter you burn a fire, the less particulates. I mean, smoke is basically unburned fuel. There are also certain gases that you get from burning at a low temperature. And if you put a biomass device in a city, it has to be smoke control approved. And really all that amounts to is that you can't burn it slow. The idea is you burn it hot and hard. And you know, if you're looking at any kind of larger system, you've always got an accumulator in there. So it means you can fire the boiler for short periods or relatively short periods, but burn it absolutely hot. That's the way forward. Just you know, avoid smoking it slow and banking it up overnight, which we used to do, but I don't think that's the right approach anymore. We've got cleverer at storing heat than that. I keep all mine for at least 3 years, probably more, before it gets burned. You know, the more money you spend, really, the greater environmental impact you have.